All right, it has been 1 minute, so we'll go ahead and jump in. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm excited, always look forward to the first webinar of the new year and looking ahead at everything that's coming, everything that's happening, and this is a big one. Really is a pivotal year. It better be. 2020 was supposed to be the start of the decade of action. Then, of course, we got sideswiped by a pandemic. It was massively disruptive in every area of our lives. But the clock is still ticking. Emissions continue to go up. All of the issues around that, touching that, related to that, remain, and we've got some new ones. So we got to get to it, chop, chop. My name is Dave Hodgins. I am the ED of the LA Better Buildings Challenge, founder of Sustento Group. And it will be my privilege to walk through a bunch of updates on what's happening at the national level, what's happening at the local level, ways that you can plug in, and ways we can work together. But before I dive in, as always, want to thank our sponsor and funder, the LA Department of Water and Power. It's really a privilege to do this work, and we couldn't do it without their support and vision. And it's been over a decade now that we've been doing this work, and that we've been working with some of you. And we really value these relationships, because that's really what it's all about. As usual, we'll be keeping the lines muted just to keep things orderly. Happy to take questions. At the end, I'm going to try to get through a lot of content, not rush through it, but get through it. If there are questions, please do send those, and we'll have ways to get in touch, of course, at the end, and appreciate your feedback, as always. So pretty simple agenda today. I think I already covered this, but zooming from 30,000 feet down to 10, 5, and right down to the projects. So with that, some national context. The next slide, please. The big news, of course, is the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and there is a historic level of funding in there for climate-related and specifically buildings-related initiatives and infrastructure all around that. The sausage is still being made, if you will, and we're following this very closely. We are at the table in several of the conversations that are happening, and we'll be providing updates as we have them. And I'm sure a lot of you are following as best you can what's happening there. But a historic investment of $400 billion in federal funding for clean energy. And of course, the goal with this is to drive investment from other sources as well, specifically, right, private sector. We've got close to $56 trillion in pension funds, future-oriented, long-term investors that can come into play, and tons of upside opportunity, as you guys all know, right? We've been involved in this for a long time. Tax incentives, some fixes to 179D and some of the tax credits around renewable energy, which have not been usable by, for example, real estate investment trusts and certain other investors, making those work, right? And that can have a huge effect. So following that very closely, grants for nonprofits and affordable housing providers, loan guarantees, that's a part that we're following very closely, because there's a significant amount of money, 27 billion in there for CDFIs and supporting initial capitalization or expanding lending through green banks and various other means. So I have some charts that show how this breaks down a little bit more. As you can see, the big piece, the really big piece, is around energy. So how does this total 400 break down? Transportation, environment, manufacturing, these are all related, of course, in agriculture, water, but this is really, very much energy focused. On the next slide, we break it down a little bit further into how this works out in the form of mostly incentives again, and this is to bring in private investment to the equation and really setting the table, right? Trying to create the right incentive structure so that capital can flow really in a way that it never has before. So stay tuned for more on developments with the Inflation Reduction Act. We're working with our partners in the Mayor's Office and Department of Water and Power closely on this, as well as with external partners that are there at the table. So more to come on that. Shifting a little bit to policy, right? We've got how to pay for all of this, how to incentivize investment, and then putting some structure around that, putting some goals and deadlines. So the federal government is trying to lead by example here. We work very closely with the GSA, as some of you know, and I'll touch on that collaboration later in the deck here. Some really cool opportunities to plug in to that this year. But federal buildings self-imposing a building performance standard, which is essentially a euphemism for a carbon tax. Where there's a carbon budget below which each building must operate or pay a fine. And that is how it works in the markets where these already exist. But I think there's a lot that can be learned from this. And on the next slide, we'll see a trend that's happening around the country. And I'll go ahead and turn my camera on here. Just realized I was flying without that. So hello. Around the country, there are building performance standards in an increasing number of major markets and some surprising ones. You know, St. Louis, Missouri, who'd have thought? But of course, you've got New York, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and the state of California signed on to this coalition in 2022, so last year, and LA City and LA County are also both part of it. So it's a safe bet, and we'll get into more of the local developments that we will see a building performance standard, aka a carbon tax, at some point in the relatively near future in LA. The good news is that LA is taking a very thoughtful approach, really trying to learn from what's worked, what's been challenging in other markets, trying to get the numbers right, and really trying to understand the practical implications, both for the grid, for the consumer, the customer, from a technical perspective, from an investment perspective. What is it that they would be asking or requiring customers to do, and over what time frame? So that conversation is ongoing. I think a lot of folks are also USGBC members. They've been doing a great job of tracking this as well. So again, I think it's a safe bet that California's on board, and LA is not far behind. Next slide, please. I talked about California already, but they put out a very ambitious plan, and for what's the world's, I didn't check the rankings, 8th or 9th largest economy in the world. This is a big deal, and it's very comprehensive, looking at not just climate but pollution, right? That's how we used to talk about this in the 80s, right? Was pollution, back when Captain Planet was my favorite show. So pollution, GHGs, gas consumption, specifically moving to electrify more buildings, more end uses, transportation. There's a jobs piece here, which of course is not necessarily our audience's primary driver here, right? This is about enhancing the resilience of your assets and the financial performance of those assets, and providing a better quality for the building user. But there are these systems benefits which are really important, and they ripple through the economy. So, for example, health benefits that not just make people more productive in work, happier to work in the building where they're at, but have huge system cost benefits. And this is something we're looking at very deeply, specifically in the affordable housing space, where we see such an overlap between really bad health outcomes and social determinants of health, aka where you live. Next, please. Meanwhile, the private sector has not stopped. It's been really exciting for me as a fan to watch this sort of coalescence of major investors, major asset managers into these very powerful tribes. GRESB, the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, is of course global. Providing undergirding standards around this. How do you rank different portfolios' performance relative to one another? Participation is surging there, as well as Ceres, which is a nonprofit as well that's bringing together a lot of these parties and has spun off a new organization, I guess would be the right term, called the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, which a lot of our LABBC partners are part of or considering. And all of this is aligning, and this is what's exciting to me, with the UN, so United Nations, so starting to think globally about this problem, the race to zero. And so this is all underpinned by, robust science. I think everybody has been very, very focused on getting the data frameworks in place, on credible goal setting. So science-based targets, just couldn't fit the logo on the slide, is an important part of this, and something that we highly encourage partners to look into if they've not already done so. But this is moving very fast, and this is really exciting to see. And so, in a sense, we at LABBC are trying to help all of this come into alignment, so that data can flow, so that projects can happen on a timeline that makes sense with the minimum number of roadblocks. So related to this, standards, right? Standards for projects. What do we mean when we talk about a net zero building, a net zero retrofit? What does that mean? Net zero carbon, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, all of the above. ASHRAE is working on a standard. It is out for comment right now, but it is not there yet, right? So we're really in the early days of this transition, but it's super exciting. And I'll talk more about ways that you can get involved and help to figure this out. What does this mean in LA, given the current state of play in terms of equipment availability and grid stability and other asset specific, site specific considerations. New Buildings Institute has put out some really good resources, and we're working with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, via our affiliation with the Department of Energy, to learn and feedback and do peer sharing about what we are learning. And NREL is looking to ultimately publish a library of different pathways to net zero, and what that means in existing buildings. And we are trying to bring this all together at the local level into something that can make sense. Next point, there was just a webinar about this today. So anyone who's on a webinar binge today maybe saw this. If not, we will be providing a recap of this along with the recap of this talk, and incorporating this into our work. I think this is happening. It's an evolution that everybody has been trying to think through as we shift from strictly efficiency, reducing energy consumption, to a somewhat broader notion of decarbonization, where you're electrifying more end uses, right? And you've got some noise then happening in the data, efficiency driving things down, electrification driving things up. You've got solar, you've got other clean power purchases in the mix. How do you make sense of this? And Energy Star Portfolio Manager is the tool, right? That's what is being used for different regulatory purposes in cities across the country. It is the standard that everybody points to, huge brand recognition. So Energy Star recognizing this issue of the noisy data is evolving. And so this next gen standard is recognizing the importance of being able to parse out efficiency, again, with electrification, on-site generation, clean power purchases, in a way that supports, right, ESG reporting, investor reporting, and compliance with local policies. So a lot of moving parts at the moment. So bringing it down to the local, these are all the threads that we are trying to chase down and weave together again into something that makes sense, that we can actually work with and decision from today here in LA. And so this is a recap of the important milestones that are laid out in the LA Sustainable City Plan, or AKA the Green New Deal. 2020, remember, that was the beginning of the decade of action. 2025 is the next milestone, and we've got our own milestones in here, looking to grow participation in this leadership initiative, this platform, and very specific targets. I mentioned science-based targets. This 22% is very precise because it's science-based. That is a LA specific target that comes from the Sustainable City Plan that will help to put LA on track for a 1.5C scenario. And there's a new metric that I'm real excited about that I'm going to get to at the end. But this 1.5C is very, very vague. I mean, we don't even, what is that in Fahrenheit, right? And by the way, we're already at 1.1. So we are it's not as if we have 1.5 to go. So I think that's a point that gets lost. On to 2035 and on to 2050. And where this has all been, we've been talking about this for how long, several years. This is starting to become real. This is starting to become the law of the land. So at the end of last year, if we go to the next slide, City Council unanimously approved an ordinance requiring all new buildings within city limits to be all electric. And so this is very much in line with what's happening at the state level. But, starting this year, all new buildings, all electric. So this is really going to push manufacturers to develop new technology, bigger heat pumps, right? How are we going to decarbonize space heating and water heating? Especially in large buildings, right? We've got heat pumps up to 20 tons right now, pretty straightforward. But beyond that, we're in new territory. So these kinds of policies push, right, the industry to continue to develop. And so gauntlet is thrown. And again, LA is not acting alone on this. And existing buildings will be next. So if we go to, I guess it's in another few slides ahead, I'll get to that. But remember, there's been so much news coming at us, but let's not forget how close we were to a major blackout over the summer. And, we laughed about it, right? A text message, right, prevented a massive blackout, but that's what it took, right? And we can't, the California Independent Systems Operator is careful, right, not to abuse the phone privileges, and people will tune things out, right, if they become too frequent. So it was very cool on the one hand that we were able to curtail demand so quickly and at such a level through voluntary measures, but we can't count on that, is what I'm hearing from from experts, and that we really need to lock in these reductions. And of course, that's what we all on this call are working on. We have a new mayor. This was a very exciting race. It could have gone either way. There was leads passing back and forth. It's Karen Bass, our first female mayor, and our second African-American mayor in LA, which is super cool. And she is very committed to the goals of the Green New Deal. Homelessness is at the top of the list, of course, and there's a nexus there between housing affordability, energy performance, health, and homelessness, and something I look forward to diving into with her team as they staff up, but starting to see some familiar faces popping up there. And I think that we can safely say, and with the Olympics coming, there's going to be a big focus on this from the Bass administration. We also have a chief heat officer, which I'm not sure if we're the only city that has one of these, but we do. And she is also the director of the relatively newly created Climate Emergency Mobilization Office. And this is not a mayoral function. This is a new city department that's working across departments, actually, to coordinate resources, coordinate efforts and communication around these issues. And so also excited, we're having regular calls with Marta and her team. They just hired like 5 new people, and really impressed with her and her, hugely committed to this work and extremely collaborative. So I think we're seeing the right kind of organizational capacity coming online within the city to make this all work. And really, new buildings needed to get done first. New buildings legislation, rather, needed to get done first. That was the priority. Garcetti team was very proud of the fact that got done. Now the shift is to existing buildings. And as I said, taking a thoughtful approach. How will this work be paid for? How much will it cost? Is there subsidy needed? And this is all great timing in a sense, as we've got an opportunity with the IRA dollars coming down. So now's the time. DWP, continues to make big investments in this space. And I guess the one I would point out on this slide that's pretty cool is that now with the addition of this Red Cloud Wind project to the portfolio, DWP is at 60%, is now carbon free. So they've committed to getting off of coal on a schedule. They did not refurbish the 3 gas-fired peaker plants 2 years ago, and now we see this investment. So DWP is really staying the course here and working to decarbonize the supply side. But as we've talked about, ad nauseum, efficiency first. Efficiency is what's going to, and demand reduction are what's going to make these investments by DWP optimized, right? Minimized and covering the smallest pie possible. So the most cost effective, because this is all going to get translated into rates ultimately. That's a whole big conversation that we recognize needs to happen. But supply side, decarbonization is moving. And so how do we decarbonize the demand side in sync with that? And so again, we look forward to continuing to work with you guys to help chart out that path. Meanwhile, our friend EBW, the Existing Buildings Energy and Water Efficiency Ordinance, is back. So after a hiatus under the COVID emergency order, that's coming back. So it's important to stay ahead of the curve. A lot of you have continued to benchmark and have continued to line up properties for energy audits and track savings from projects you've implemented, but we've seen that some have taken a break from reporting while the deadlines were not being enforced. Well, that's coming back online this year. So thinking a little further ahead, staying ahead of the curve, a BPS for existing buildings will happen. And so the work that you're doing to comply with EBW and to stay right in compliance with loan docs and investor requirements and meeting your own ESG goals and commitments, all of that's preparing you for a building performance standard. But I think keeping good records of reductions that you've made over time is very good to keep in mind. One note for folks that are still uploading your energy, your electricity, gas, and water data manually or through some other system, the utilities, DWP and SoCalGas, both have the ability to automatically upload your data straight into your Energy Star account once you go through a setup process. So we have documentation on how to do that. It can save a lot of time. So we recommend that people look into that. We'll provide some resources and follow up to this. And by the way, they'll upload past year's data too. So it actually goes back 5 years of aggregated whole building data. So especially in certain triple net buildings or multifamily buildings where a lot of the consumption is in the tenant occupied space, this is a big shift in being able to get that whole building data. So look into that. Start thinking about electrification and decarbonization opportunities. If you're getting an audit, make sure that it does meet the requirements of the ordinance, but you might think about including in the scope, tell me about options to electrify. Tell me about more options for on-site renewable energy, because a traditional audit will not look at that. If an engineer is following the ASHRAE guideline for a level 2 audit closely, that's not part of the scope. So if you want to look ahead and suggest that that's a good practice, got to make sure to ask for that. And water, of course, it's been raining a little bit lately, a lot of it lately, but drought is not over, and the water supply has not been replenished. Incentives are triple right now for water conservation. And the way the ordinance is written, EBW is written, it's basically impossible to be exempted from the water audit and RCX requirements. So make sure that that's in there. Even Energy Star certified buildings, which don't technically have to do anything else on the energy side, generally still do need to address water. So just a heads up that these requirements are going to start being enforced. And this is just good information to have for forward planning. So please reach out if you have any questions on this. We are relaunching later this week our existing buildings, Energy and Water Resource Center, to a cooler name, Retrofit LA, easier to remember. The same resources plus some new ones that we're really excited about, but the benchmarking resources I mentioned, so how to set up the automated whole building data feeds from DWP and SoCalGas, that's there. If you have questions about how to comply with EBW, what's the best strategy for your building given how much time there is left, or if you don't know how much time you have, we've built a tool called the Navigator, which will walk you through. It's like TurboTax for EBW. If you have some very basic information or knowledge about the building, you can get a case-specific recommendation in terms of the best compliance path for you, what the deadlines are, and it feeds directly into some questions, if you choose to continue, about rebate opportunities, and then connects you with DWP. So those are in beta. I'm pretty excited about it. It's been a lot of work to get those things online, but it takes, what is a pretty complicated piece of legislation and breaks it down into a series of questions that someone with a basic knowledge of the building should be able to answer in a single session. You don't have to be calling around. You don't have to wait for emails back. It is a self-service tool that will get you informed and on your way. We do also have on the website an audit and RCX provider directory. We will be reopening the request for qualifications for firms that would like to be included on that. So it is not exclusive, but we do need folks to provide certain information. The value add from a customer perspective is that we take some of the slack out of the process of you having to shop around. Who do I even reach out to? We will check that they have proper licensure with the state. We will check references. We will check that they have actually benchmarked as many buildings of a certain type as they say they have, and provide an alphabetized list so that you can choose with confidence a firm or interview several that can service your needs. We are also available to provide troubleshooting on Energy Star and referrals, but the idea here is that we want to make this as self-serve and really empower folks to figure out the best way for their buildings in a consistent, instant way as we can. So look out for that. The old website will redirect to this, but we'll be launching that later this week. So with that, I'd like to go over, again, the different ways that you can get involved with LABBC. And just to recap again, where we are in time, because we're still kind of coming out of a time warp. I know my family got hit with this whole RSV thing, really threw us off. But here we are, we're in 2023. So we're close to that second milestone that was called out when this revised plan was released back in 2020. We are looking to grow participation in the program. We continue to try to grow the program, get LA's best buildings involved, and helping to tell the story and build the story of what's happening around building decarb in LA. And looking out all the way to 2050, I hope to still be doing this in 2050. Our 2025 goals, zooming in a little bit more, is to top out at 1,000 buildings. About 150 million square feet would be great. So an average building size of 150,000, good sized buildings. And these are the science-based targets. We're not making these up, that come from the Sustainable City Plan. Looking at where we are now, we're doing really well. We've got about 3/4 of that square footage enrolled, with more joining each month. So if you're not already part of this and you feel like you should be, please reach out. Not all the buildings that signed up have been able to be on track, right? This is not easy, and managing the data is also a challenge. And so with COVID and so forth, we're trying to work with everybody to help get that data where it needs to be for all the different purposes, right? Ours is obviously not the primary use of this data necessarily. There's other really important uses. So we're here as a resource to help with this. And but the buildings who are on track, the buildings that are committed, have already beat the goal, and that's super exciting to see. And this really is possible. And as we start to buckle down even more, I think we're going to see ways to tunnel through to even greater savings. And we're behind on water. I think we're behind on where we want to be on water. So it's undervalued, right? It's underpriced, and so we're really working to develop that as a priority with our partner organizations. So with that, we have really tried to simplify the different pathways, partner pathways, ways that we can work together. And this doesn't have to be a la carte, choose one. In fact, we find that a lot of our partners will choose all of the above, which is great. And so what we do is to set a regular recurring meeting on a bi-monthly basis. So it's not a huge time commitment. We work with the existing team, any existing consultants or other internal partners, external partners, to put some structure around the priorities that you tell us are important to you. And then we throw resources at that. So it really is a collaborative effort. I say we celebrate and support. So awards are important, right? Recognition is important. It's not like most of you get paid extra for energy performance. Some may, which is really cool. But that recognition is important, and that market awareness is important. And I'm going to dive into all of these, I realize, in more depth here. But recognition, a focus on water, a focus on emerging technology, market-ready technology, and opportunities to pilot and then scale deployment of successful pilots throughout the portfolio. And then Low Carbon Leaders is our net zero retrofit collaboration with DOE and NREL. Which has really become the core, I would say, of the engagements that we're having with our partners. And the feedback has been great. We had a roundtable last fall with Douglas Emmett and Paramount Studios, just talking about their experience with this. And I can just say it's been really fun for us, because the conversations are so engaged and so far ranging really putting all options on the table to find what's going to make sense for a given building, a given site. So I'll dive into these each a little bit more. Innovation Awards, each year, we've been doing this for over 10 years now. We recognize LA's best buildings. And I think this is a really unique program in the way that it works. And, we've shifted towards really doing more video. That's an important part of it. You can see the videos from last year's winners on our website. Of course, media and PR is important, and the trophies. So the trophies are really cool. Actually, we really thought hard about, what should this be? What would be an appropriate, significant award? And so these awards are actually made from wood that's reclaimed from fallen trees around LA or East LA, that are fabricated into awards on site at the LA Clean Tech Incubator by a trainee who's gaining job skills and business skills. So it really kind of embodies what I think it's all about in terms of sustainability, closing loops, social equity, and it's a good time. So looking forward to that. This year's awards will be on March 29th, and we'll be pumping out some highlights from this year's winners, which I'm not going to reveal yet, after that date. Talked about water. Drop 100 is our campaign. We've brought it back, thinking of changing it to 100 billion, but right now it's 100 million gallons from 100 cooling towers. And those numbers are based on really, attainable figures. It is easy in a lot of cases to save 1 million gallons a year per tower. And that's really the biggest untapped opportunity. Now there's still, of course, opportunities around irrigation and even some, indoor water use, but a lot of that low-hanging fruit has been picked. So we provide free technical assistance, project development support, incentive analysis. So if we get the water data from you, we can actually walk the site, develop opportunities to surface with you for discussion, crunch the incentives. And what we're seeing is right now, as I said here, triple incentives right now from DWP. It is a no-brainer. It's literally instant payback and net cash in your pocket to retrofit your cooling tower to better treatment options, even very advanced treatment options. So if you want to get away from chemicals, for example, for workplace safety reasons and health reasons, and get some lead points for that. Those projects, or even groundwater reclamation projects, we're seeing paybacks of 2 years and less. So not to mention the fact that, we really, really need to be better stewards of our water in Southern California. So we can really support water projects end to end. Our technical advisor, Mo Besnick, is phenomenal, the best in the business. And we can work with your team and your existing vendors to see what can make sense for your buildings. So this is another one that almost everyone is taking us up on. It has some crossover with what we call our pilot to portfolio option. So taking a pilot and scaling what works throughout the portfolio. And what we were hearing and inferring just from being out in the market and talking with people is that there's so much happening, which is on the one hand great and exciting. And on the other hand, people are kind of bombarded, right, with sales calls and how to make the time and to have the people in the room to really sift through everything that's out there, see what's real, what actually has application for my buildings, what's worth spending time on. And so we did a webinar when we launched this last fall, which we'll be doing a redux and update this year. But the directory is up. And it was developed in collaboration with our friends at the GSA, the U.S. General Services Administration, the Association for Energy Affordability. They focus on multifamily. Fifth Wall, which is the largest clean tech venture capital fund in the world. They're actually based here in LA, in Venice. And USGBC LA has a focus on earlier stage technologies where they've done a good job of vetting those. So uh, pulling together, this is really like a synthesis or an aggregation of technologies that really have been vetted by these partners and our LABBC partners, I should say, all of you, really, foremost, and creating a searchable, really usable resource that can give you some ideas. So it's by no means exhaustive, right? If you see something that you're excited about, that you think that others should know about, or if you want something looked at, please get in touch with us. On the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about the partnership with GSA. They are really looking to have an impact and to open themselves up in ways that can make their work more impactful, right? And so a big part of what I think about is how do we, knowledge transfer, right? Up and down and laterally. And so how can we take the resources and the thinking that's happening at the federal level, where they've got all these resources, right? They've got national labs, they've got groups within the Department of Energy, they've got this massive portfolio, the largest in the country, of office buildings to use as their laboratory. How can we take that and benefit the private sector with that? Well, that's what the directory does. So we're taking the technologies that have been successfully piloted in GSA buildings, which are just office buildings, and kind of pulling back the curtain. Who did they use? What were the results? And how do you actually get in touch with them? And then we support, right, the placement of those pilots. They just closed this year's RFI, this request for information. They got 95 submissions. They're in the process of narrowing those down to 20 to 25 semifinalists. And I've been part of their down select committee a few times. It's a lot of fun. I mean, it's just incredible level of discussion, quality of technologies they're considering. And this year, they're opening up that opportunity for LABBC partners to participate, or the private sector to participate. So our partners at Fifth Wall are going to be invited, and we want to open it up to you all to participate in that. And here's a little testimonial. I asked him if I could share it, and he said, okay, from Doug at Paramount. And, he participated last year, and I think, his testimonial says a lot, but I'll just highlight the part in bold that a single individual would spend a minimum of 10 or 20x the amount of time that he invested to collect and understand all the information that he got through this. Not to mention, it's just cool to be part of these conversations and networking with building scientists at the national labs. So look out for invitations to participate in this. I think this is very cool, and I'm really proud to continue to grow that relationship. Low carbon leaders. So this is, again, net zero retrofits. What do we mean by that? How do you actually go about this? Where are the reductions going to come from? What's a long range plan, a multi-year plan that makes sense for a given asset? That's what this is about. And so over a 2-year period, because it takes a while to develop all these opportunities, we have a structured process for going through this. Regular meetings could start off monthly, could be bi-monthly, to advance a conversation to how to get to net zero in a given building. Now that's, of course, looking at efficiency, demand response, load shifting, on-site renewable energy, off-site renewable energy, RECs to zero out the rest. And how does that all come together into a plan? And then the idea is that those plans get published. And we don't need to include dollar figures necessarily, but we do get into implementation strategies, timelines. So how will this actually happen? And I'm going to talk more about how do we fund it, because that's a kind of a fundamental point. But this becomes a map or example, a library that others can follow. So it's very early days. From what I can gather, this group on the next slide here is really leading the way nationally. So the feedback I'm getting is that they're very interested in what we're learning. about what it takes to decarbonize an existing building. And of course, that looks different, right, in Southern California than it does even in Northern California, certainly very different than Boston or Minneapolis. But we need examples in all of these markets so that people can follow fast, right? That's what we need. And so, really have enjoyed working with the partners over this past year. Some of these are starting to guide into completion of the action plan, and others were still at exploratory stages in really exhausting the list of options and getting into financing. But we want more. We want everybody to be part of this. So that means you. This is proven to be a very constructive construct for looking at, really the full picture. So, a lot of us have ESG commitments, even net zero commitments that are out there. We've maybe started to do some audits in this direction. Please reach out. We want to help learn from what you're doing, help connect you into the local policy development process. And, again, as I talked about at the top, we're trying to bring together a lot of different threads, right, into something that starts to make sense and tells a real story. So how to fund this? How do we think about this even? A focus on financing, and this is coming up a lot, in our conversations now, and we think it's really central to getting clear about what's possible. What is a good investment? How do we think about ROI? What's included in that, right? I think the business as usual, or the sort of working definition, has been, capital outlay relative to energy savings. Maybe we'll throw in some O&M savings with that, maybe not. But what's the value of carbon? What's the value of enhanced employee productivity? What's the value of tenant retention? All of these things have economic value. They're just not considered in the typical ROI of a decarbonization or an efficiency upgrade. So getting clear about what is the return on investment, what are all the elements of that? And what I mean by what is a good investment is what's going to get greenlit. Can we get a consensus on that so that we don't have to go? Obviously, every project needs to go for approval, but so that we know what's the target we're trying to hit, what's the box that we're trying to work within. With a clear understanding of that, then engineers, contractors can be creative within that and put together comprehensive projects or individual projects, pull together different incentive streams. Again, when we're clear about how we're thinking about this, maybe a project that wouldn't have met a simple payback hurdle, all of a sudden it does when we think about what's the value of occupant health, or what's the value of the GHG emissions reductions and fulfilling on our ESG commitments and bumping our GRESB score. Am I going to get that RFP? Am I going to get that tenant walking through the building? So these are the conversations, and this is different for every organization, but we want to have these conversations and get to a clearer place so that we don't have lots of dedicated folks working super hard to develop projects that don't get funded. Let's make this really clear and productive. And so that can lead to a strengthening or development of an internal financing program. Maybe it's a revolving loan fund. Maybe there's a green bond issuance that then the proceeds get invested through a fund. Or maybe it's third-party financing. These are all conversations that we can have. And the screenshot that's here comes from our partners at the Department of Energy. We did a similar thing years back and are going to refresh it, basically create a localized version of this that will help to understand what are the different options that are available and connect you with credible providers. I think DOE has done an awesome job here, but they're constrained in certain ways because they are the federal government. So I think that this is there's too much here almost. We want to make something that is more localized and curated to our market. So more coming on that. and would appreciate input from folks that have ideas in that area. So I'm going to start to move to conclude. Just a little look ahead. I think I've touched on a lot of this, but logically, our webinars are going to focus on the areas that I've laid out, the different programmatic areas that we are focused on for this year. We'll be doing a deeper dive on policy and incentives in March. We hope to have Marta, the director of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office, she's confirmed, as well as our colleague from LADWP, to give a look ahead on where they are with incentives for all of this, and how does that come together with policy, and how does that all line up in the time vector. We'll be highlighting our Innovation Awards winners, which I'm keeping myself from announcing right now. Going deeper on this financing topic. What is a good project? What does that even mean? A deeper dive on water. This is just a perennial topic. A refresh on pilot portfolio, the options there, and our net zero retrofit roundtable. So a report out from low carbon leaders. So we're staying pretty tightly focused here on the areas where we are actively engaging, where we want to actively engage with you. So with that, as I think about, the year ahead and how to kind of organize just my own thinking about where to spend time, it's like, where's the highest leverage point, how to kind of think about this. And when I first started working with my coach, my business coach, I was telling him about our work, and he's like, it's 1 and 1 is 100. Right, 1 and 1 is, and it just has stuck with me and resonated that with me. Is it's like the Gestalt theory, where the sum is, or the product is greater than the sum of its parts. Right, these are the kinds of opportunities that we want to be looking for, especially the clock is ticking. Right, we've lost time, and meanwhile the goalposts have not moved. Right, so how are we going to get there? So I read different things. I think about, what will help me focus. What do I think might resonate with folks? And I read a book by a historian named Yuval Noah Harari. Is an Israeli historian, called Sapiens. And it was a pretty popular book. He's written a follow-up that was also fantastic. But he and his team did some research, and they crunched numbers from the International Energy Agency, a few different sources, Reuters survey of climate scientists. And what they've found is, the question of, how much is this all going to cost, is that it's about 2% more than we're currently spending on clean energy investments globally, which is about 1% of global GDP. So for 2% more, all of the different independent analyses kind of converge around this. So it's not 50%, it's not 20%, it's not even 15, it's low single digits. And that's very doable, right? I mean, we shift 2% around here and there all the time in budgets, whether that's, at the city level or at a business or an asset level. So this made me feel really good. However, he's not a climate scientist and he's not a building scientist. And so, he kind of left it there and said, we just need to be smart. That 2% needs to be invested in the right places. And that's what, others need to figure out. So I was like, well, it was a little bit of a letdown. That's really exciting news. We've got 1.5 degrees and 2%, seems doable. Then I remembered another resource that I really liked. And this is a book that I have it on my bookshelf, called Drawdown. Paul Hawken, he's an entrepreneur, a thinker, an author, was looking at the same set of problems. He's like, well, where should we focus? What's the plan? And there was no plan. There is no plan. And so he put together a team of scientists, and they created one. They looked at a lot, I would say all exhaustive list of all the potential solutions, but most of the major ones that, that I could think of, and they studied them. And they created a solutions library where they've looked at the climate impact in terms of gigatons of GHG reductions by 2050. They've done financial analysis to look at the net present value of these different solutions, and then they ranked them. And so that was really interesting. I'd encourage folks, we'll include a link to look at the top 10. But what was great news to me, because I'm a person who likes to, be a active participant in this space. And if you go to the next slide, is that buildings are right at the center. I mean, literally the nexus of so many of the solutions. And I think we kind of know this intuitively, but to see it quantified was really cool. So 12 of the top 100 solutions were actually, specifically in buildings. But if you add up the adjacencies where, buildings are really driving demand, right, for decarbonized cement. Now we've got, right, all electric new buildings. There's going to be a building performance standard that starts to create a market for these products. When we look at utility scale energy, utility scale solar and so forth, wind, those are not counted in the building space. So if you add it all together, it's incredible and it's super exciting. I mean, the ability that we all have, that you have, to really make a difference in this and be really, agents of change. That to me feels really good, and I hope it does to you too. And specifically, 2 of the top 10 solutions have to do with refrigerants that are used in buildings, management of those, transitioning to new ones. If you add those 2 things together, that's more valuable from a climate perspective than all of the utility scale solar. It's more valuable than protecting the entire Amazon rainforest. It's incredible. It's incredible, the opportunity that we have. And so to me, this is an example of what my coach meant when he said 1 and 1 is 100. We take that 2%, this is doable, right? We got 2%. And then we actually look at the multiplier effects of investing in buildings and energy transition, and it's massive. I mean, the opportunity is massive. So just to put this in perspective a little bit more, if we look at, and this is from Harari here, what can 2% of global GDP buy? In 2020, 2% would equate to about $1.7 trillion. So that's a lot of money, but it's a very small piece of the pie. So you look at that, 2%, it's a small amount. For 2%, actually for less than 2%, you could buy the entire Amazon rainforest is actually less than 1%. You could buy the entire Amazon rainforest for a one-time investment of less than 1% of global GDP and retire it, be done with it. I could go on to different examples, but this is really cool to see, relatively small percentage of the total, if applied strategically, can do some really cool permanent fixes that have all kinds of other cool benefits. So what would that mean in LA? Trying to zoom down. So this was kind of my own math here, pulling math from other people, I should say. But so LA metro area GDP in 2021 was about $950 billion. 2% of that is $19 billion. That's a good chunk of money. But what does that actually translate into? There's a study that was done, sponsored by Natural Resources Defense Council, that looked at the cost to decarbonize affordable multifamily housing. Housing is a massive crisis in LA. How are we going to decarbonize that? 2 to 7 billion to decarbonize affordable multifamily. That's deed restricted. An additional 9 to 16 billion to decarbonize naturally occurring or workforce housing, which is naturally affordable. You tack those together for a one-time investment of 2% of our local GDP, we could fix that issue completely. And the ripple effects would be profound, from a social perspective, from a health perspective, from a grid reliability perspective. So just to put that in perspective, that's something we could do if we organize it the right way. And I'm not suggesting, to be clear, that this should all be done with public money, but just to fire the synapse for you. Another thing that we did last year, a big project, was a collaboration with the Urban Land Institute and the Greenprint Foundation, looking at, under their net zero imperative, the opportunity to expand the downtown central cooling plants under Bunker Hill to serve more buildings, and to expand it throughout downtown to create a network of district cooling plants. And all kinds of cool ideas came out of that conversation. The report is out online now. We did some webinars about this if you're interested to see a deeper dive, but this is the kind of project that is ripe for IRA funding, or if we can think about, what can 2% buy? We can do big things. And bringing that district cooling infrastructure closer to smaller buildings will support decarbonization of multifamily. So back to that previous idea, enhances resilience of the community, supports decarbonization more broadly. So we can think big. We can think big, and it's actually not a huge piece of the pie. So to conclude, I realize I'm at time here. Building decarb is on the way, so it is time to think about that. The work you're doing will count, and we encourage folks to go beyond, what EBWE is asking for, and think more deeply about it. It's not too late. This is very cool. I found this Harari and Hawken 1 + 1 = 100 very inspiring to me, because sometimes it can feel like, man, it's already happening. It's too late, and it's not. We can do this, but we need to get on it, and we're here to help. So a little quote from Yuval Harari, the author that came up with this 2% more analysis. But to save the environment, we do not need to completely derail the economy, nor abandon the achievements of modern civilization. We just need to get our priorities right. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I do not want to live on Mars. I think we all know how that ends. We've seen Total Recall on the next slide. Next slide, please. We all know how this ends. This is our home. For a very small piece of the pie, we can do this. So thank you guys for tuning in. I look forward to your feedback and to working together in this pivotal year. Thank you all.